Chad Robley is the founder and CEO of Mindgruve, one of the nation's fastest growing independent digital marketing agencies. Chad, welcome.
Thank you.
You heard my little spiel up at the front. I'm just curious, what's your take on that?
Well, in general, I think that, first of all, I want to commend you on putting together this event. I think it's really, really smart to bring non-radio folks to this kind of forum and talk about the things that are happening outside of the radio industry. So, I think that when you look at, I work with people in the publishing industry, the newspaper industry. I have worked with radio in the past many years ago, and I think that we've really never known a ton about those particular mediums when we entered them, but we sort of brought a fresh perspective to it. And I think that was one of our advantages when we worked with some of these clients. Union Tribune here locally, UT San Diego now. I think, it's interesting. Mike Hodges, who's a good buddy of mine, will be speaking later. The newspaper folks come together for a newspaper convention to learn about what's new and what's the next thing that's going to be innovative in newspaper. I always find that funny. Because that's probably the last place you should go to find out what's happening in the world of innovation. So, UT San Diego would be a good example. Somebody said, look, we're going to go to the outside and look at people with a fresh perspective on it. It doesn't mean that people outside your industry have all the answers. It just means that, I would encourage everybody that's sort of in the radio industry or any other medium for that matter that's, is thrown into the kind of the traditional medium bucket to go to non-industry specific conferences. Go to South by, not that that's the end all be all, but go to the digital conferences, get ingrained in what's happening there, and that'll help you sort of innovate and disrupt in your own industry.
So, any thoughts specifically on kind of the content that I laid out, though? I'm kind of interested in your perspective because you live in that transmedia space all the time.
Yeah, so I've read, some of the questions and so forth that, around, native advertising obviously is a big buzzword right now. Developing original content. You spoke a little bit about that earlier. Sort of unique content and platforms, right? That was from your presentation. Yeah. I think as it relates to unique content, content is more king, than ever. So having unique content and exclusive content to me is going to be important, because at the end of the day, if it's not exclusive and it's not exclusive content, then they're going to consume it in the platform or medium of their choice, which may or may not be the one that you reside in. So I think that it's important that, I like the idea of sort of innovating in and around content, making it unique and something that you can own yourself. And I think as it relates to brands, one of the fastest probably growing part of our business is really our content department. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, I was telling our creative director, I said, I think we're going to end up, content is going to be one of the most important things that we do as an agency. And he looked a little confused. He's like, writing copy for websites? I'm like, no, creating content for our clients. And the reason is, you could see it happening long ago, is that brands have a very difficult time. It's tough to build, create original content, and in many ways become their own publishers. So I think that there's a company called BuzzFeed that many of you may be aware of that is obviously blazing a trail right now, developing content for brands. It'll be interesting to see where that all goes, because it's an interesting business to scale. But they seem to be doing it so far. But BuzzFeed, I think, is a good example of sort of the content is king, and how brands are now looking at themselves as publishers. Kraft is a good example. Kraft, they've got magazines. They're going print. They're going obviously very heavy on digital and applications and so forth. So they're thinking of unique ways to become publishers, and really, I think at the end of the day, it's really integrate their content into the everyday lives of their consumers. So when we look at healthcare, we're working with a brand of Procter & Gamble's called MDVIP. We're working with Merck now, and we're sort of reinventing the way they think of healthcare, and how do we get in the middle, or not even in the middle of, but how do we become part of their lives, their everyday lives? How do we provide them content and resources and tools to help, make their lives easier? So just speaking at them doesn't work.
Just speaking at them doesn't work.
No.
And that's a mind change for people in the traditional broadcast business who are, historically our job was to run announcements that speak at people.
Right.
And interrupt our regular programming. What you're talking about in terms of publishers brands as publishers, that means brands as media. That means brands creating their own, or you creating the content for that brand. And it strikes me that that's our business too, as broadcasters, right?
Sure.
So doesn't that invite broadcasters to be the force that, does what you do and creates content for their brand clients?
Yeah, I mean,
that's different from advertising, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all starting to blend together. So, brands are becoming publishers. Publishers are becoming brand. I mean, it's a kind of a free for all right now. We're positioned as a digital agency. Our job is to help, grow somebody's brand, grow their revenues, and so forth. We don't really care what the medium is. We're positioned as a digital agency. At the end of the day, we'll use whatever medium that we think is going to best engage and give us the best, give our clients the best returns. So I don't think anyone's, saying, well, we have to budget all of our money into digital. But I think that there is a sort of this notion, at least in the agency world, that and with clients in general, sort of this blind thing where they think that just take this money and let's just shift a ton of it and move it into digital, like it's magic, and somehow. Because if you put your money into the digital mediums, you're gonna get better returns. That's not the case at all. So I think that it's sort of an open forum. I think mobile has sort of changed obviously the game. Devices, our distribution. So that's a whole kind of new spin. And I think content. I think the traditional mediums are in a better position than anybody, frankly, to take advantage of what's happening next, so long they don't stay in their bubble. Because they already have an engaged audience. In digital, we sit around all day thinking about how the hell do we get people engaged. Radio, TV, and there's a lot of people that already have engagement and brand equity. So and reach. So it's for us. It's more of trying to figure out, what kind of content can we build? What can we create? How do we leverage it with devices, applications, and so forth.
So when you say radio broadcasters, in many ways, all broadcasters have that asset already, that permission asset, that reach, that engagement. What you're really saying is you have permission to innovate on top of that. You have permission to create new content elements on top of that. Sure. You have permission to connect with people across platforms because you already have these relationships to start with.
Sure. Well, I mean, a good example, you may or may not know this, but we work with Jim Rome. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jim.
We've heard of him.
Heard of him, yeah. Some have, some haven't. Some people, some people don't like him, some people do. Yeah. But we worked with him in sort of the probably 97 through 2001, I think it was. And at the time, Premier Radio, I don't know if anybody's from Premier Radio in here, but we're Clear Channel. I think when we started, we knew absolutely nothing about radio, but we knew Jim Rome had this big, kind of emerging following. He was still in San Diego at that time. But the way we approached it is we didn't really, say, well, how do we learn more about radio so we can help grow his brand? We said, what, let's take him into, let's leverage that reach that he has and figure out ways to kind of layer in. So the tour stops and the merchandising, and we launched jimrome.com, and we launched an e-commerce store. This is in the 90s, and it was ended up being a huge success because we were able to leverage his audience, but we brought them into sort of this digital medium. We had one of the largest sports message boards, chat rooms at the time. It was up there with like ESPN and all the rest of it. What was interesting, I think most interesting about it is, and we were able to monetize it. It was incredibly effective, sort of digital and radio working together. And like I said, we were sort of flying by the seat of our pants. The huge fax of the day became the huge email of the day. For those of you that listen, you would know what that means. Jim thought it was crazy to go, can we kind of transition from fax to email? Will you work with me a little bit here? But when we did that, we ended up having one of the largest email databases in the entire country, with Earthlink, you guys, old school email. We had this massive database, and then we found out that, hey, people will pay us $50 CPMs to send out to 500,000, sports crazy fans. $50. That's a pretty good number. So every time we hit that button, it was like, wow, that's a lot of money. So we started to learn all these interesting things, but it was all because we had this great medium that we were sort of leveraging for what the market was willing to give us, as it related to sort of the web and so forth.
But it's not just the medium, is it? You actually had an asset. It's reading between the lines of what you're saying. Sure. It strikes me. If you've got something you can work with, then you can do a lot with it. Mm-hmm. And if you've got nothing you can work with, you can't do anything with it, right?
Exactly.
It's like trying to create something viral out of nothing.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's interesting is what ended up happening is that in the 90s, where there wasn't a lot of interesting things going on with, I would say, digital and radio sort of working together, when Clear Channel came in and sort of acquired the rights back to the property for Jim Rome that we had for about 5 years, it slowly but surely, because radio got a hold of it, big radio got a hold of it, just started to unravel the whole thing. So literally to this day, you go there and it's a whole different animal. It's not even the same business. And the revenue models and the monetization, everything kind of went away. When really that should have been sort of the jumping off period, 2001, 2002, to really kind of take off.
How would you characterize that difference though? I mean,
I think that Clear Channel was slow to understand what it was that was, to really get their heads around what was happening in sort of the digital world. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, I think they had people there that knew something about digital, but they didn't have sort of this ecosystem that fostered innovation. So to kind of take this thing and continue on with it. So.
Okay. How do you go about, when you have a client like a House of Blues or something, how do you go about kind of participating with them in the development of a brand strategy?
Well,
and again, I'm not specific.
No, that's okay. House of Blues is a good one. I mean, I think that we approach, from a brand perspective, brand equity is a fluid thing. House of Blues had, in my opinion, more brand equity, 10 years ago than maybe that it does today. It was more, I think, real and kind of authentic and underground and so forth. They still have the ability, I think, to sort of recapture that, and they're sort of moving more in that direction now. But just because you have really high brand equity doesn't mean that you're going to have it forever. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a fluid and delicate thing. So when we look at, it depends on sort of that life cycle of the brand and where they're at in terms of their brand equity. If people are sort of more on the downturn of that, a lot of times we're reinventing that brand and sort of repositioning the brand in the marketplace. And I think that people, the really smart brands are they look at sort of it like a stock. They look at their brand as kind of a stock, and it kind of has, kind of does different, kind of a different trajectory depending on what's happening. But you have to really, sort of baby and care for that thing.
What do you mean by that? Stop there for a second.
Well, I think that you have to pay attention to it. If a brand's a living, breathing, organic thing, then you have to care for it, and you have to constantly be, if your competition's constantly moving and changing messaging and reacting to what you're doing, you have to kind of be doing the same thing. So we dive deep and really try to understand, kind of what the core DNA of the brand is, and make sure that we're not losing touch with that, those kind of core values, making sure that our brands are sort of, authentic, make sure that we're communicating with them, and sort of the voice and the tone that our audience wants to communicate in, and the mediums they want to communicate in. So we're not playing God on the mediums. We always say we want to be where the people are at, where our audience is at, wherever that may be. So
there's a tendency, I think, for broadcasters to think of their brands as what the brand does. Mm-hmm. The brand is defined by what it does, what it plays, for example. And you're kind of talking about something deeper, though, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, a brand to me is really the relationship piece, and the company doesn't own their brand. That's the kind of weird part about it. A company doesn't own their brand. The consumer owns the brand. So it's what their impression of that brand is. So that relationship piece, obviously relationships can be good for a while and then go bad, just like in real life. They can be really, really great and then not be so great later on. So it's very similar. We can probably, all of us here could probably rattle off a whole bunch of different examples of brands that, that used to be great and are not great anymore, have kind of lost their way. So like I said, it's really more of a relationship thing.
Okay. One of the challenges that all industries have, certainly the traditional media industry, is that, the screws are tight financially, always. How do you encourage a client to take a chance to try? Because a lot of the stuff you're talking about, creating content and so on, there are no guarantees with any of that.
No.
So how do you take these chances and create these innovations when you have these terrible pressures on you? Understandable pressures, but just the same, they have the tendency to stifle innovation.
Right. Well, there's obviously a lot of, Silicon Valley believes that big companies can't innovate at all. So if you're working for one of those big companies, that's a pretty good challenge. I would say that big companies can innovate. I think that you have to sort of disrupt yourself. And I think that, the financial part of it, to me is an excuse for not doing what you're supposed to be doing. If you think that your big company has tight budgets, go work for a startup and find out, in Silicon Valley, what tight budgets look like. So they're innovating with no money, and they're working long hours, they're busting their tail, and they're taking huge risks. And I think that more companies need to behave more like startups. They need to hire people that think more in that sort of realm and less corporate, tote the line and stay inside the lines. I think you find people, and to me it's all about hiring the right talent. I just read an article this morning about, how, traditional media is having a tough time finding talent and so forth. And it's really, to me, it's the reason why they're having a tough time, it's a culture thing. Nobody wants to work for an old, stodgy, corporation. They want to work somewhere where there's a culture of innovation. And so to the extent that you guys and others can sort of build that within their organization, you can accomplish whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
And attract the right people for it.
Let's talk mobile for a sec. Mobile is something, obviously, broadcasting is inherently mobile because the car is inherently mobile. Mm-hmm. But in terms of mobile devices, apart from what's in the car, there's a tendency to think that once we repurpose our audio feed in a stream, we're done. What advice would you give to a broadcaster that's saying, well, what in the world else could I possibly do with an app?
What else can I possibly do with an app?
I've got a radio station. What else can I do?
I'm sorry?
There's only 500,000 apps that are given.
Yeah, apps are, to me, my first question when a client or anybody asks me, we need to do an app, will you guys help us with an app? I'm like, why? For what? What are you trying to do with it? Just like a website.
The reason you ask that question is what?
Just because you build an app doesn't mean that they'll download it and they will use it. So, is there some sort of utility that only an app can solve for, and that you have a means of sort of distributing that app?
Well, and you've heard this, I'm sure. There's a sense that, yeah, but we need to be there, right? We need to be on that thing.
No, you don't. No, you don't need to be there. No, you don't. I ask people sometimes why they think they need a website, just to kind of challenge them. We need a new website. Why? Why do you need a new website? I don't know. We haven't redone our website in a while. Okay, well, what would it change if we made the site, prettier? I don't know. I mean, would it
Okay,
really...
well, let's explore this for a sec, because there are people who say, yeah, but the car dashboard, which is where a lot of radio listening happens, is undergoing this revolution.
Right.
And obviously every mobile device ties into that car dashboard, and you're going to have a zillion more options on that dashboard. So does that mean that we need to be one of those zillions of options besides the radio frequency that's in the dash right now?
Probably. That's where the people are at, right? They're in their cars. Then if you want to have engagement with people in a car, which seems odd to me, but you're driving. That's the purpose of being in the car. But navigating through an app. I mean, it's happening. It's not. We can't stop it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's for this industry. there's going to continue to be a ton of innovation, obviously in your car. That's it's mobile and it's going to be connected to your devices and everything else. Absolutely. I mean, it's wherever the people are at, you need to be there. But I always encourage, there's got to be real utility. What are you solving for that nobody else is doing right now? Are you giving them something that's unique? And that could be from a content standpoint, it could be from a tool standpoint. So that's the part of it.
And that's really true, not just in terms of apps, but that's true in terms of your presence on every platform, right?
Absolutely.
Why are you on Pinterest? Why are you
Exactly.
on Facebook? Right? There's a
Exactly.
tendency among, again, not exclusively broadcasters, but there's an easy tendency to say, well, we're there because our brand needs an outpost there, and we're going to have an outpost there, and we're going to have an outpost there, and we're going to have an outpost there.
Right.
Yes, no?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that, the thing that people get confused by sometimes is the difference between, the mediums and the strategy. Strategy isn't throwing things on Facebook and Twitter and building apps and throwing up a website. That's not strategy. Strategy is trying to figure out, where are we? Everybody's got a finite budget. What's highest best use for that budget? And that may be a whole series of different sort of mediums and tools and different things to work with. There may be assets, there may be, advertising opportunities, whatever that is. I think that, all of this goes back to strategy. And, it's not just innovation. There's creativity. Like I said, the content aspect of it is really, really critical. So all these things, this is no easy task, by the way. It's not, trust me, my company hasn't got it all figured out. And I don't know any, whether you're a digital agency or in the tech innovation space or wherever you're at, nobody's got all this stuff figured out. But what we are doing every day is trying to figure it out. And we are fully immersed in everything that's going on, and we're trying to, drink from the fire hose the best we possibly can. So that, those are the things I would encourage everybody to do. Is you got to just dive in and really become an expert in understanding, really the high-level strategy aspects, and then, what's highest best use for your budgets, and work with people outside of your industry. Just like this whole forum is fantastic.
What are the, I guess, the most important lessons you've learned from the most successful brands you've worked with?
Well, I think that learn to be a little humble, frankly, because what you think you know isn't always actually what is true. So I think that we do a lot of testing of things. So instead of just spending $500,000 on something, we'll do something sort of we call an MVP, kind of your minimum viable product. We test it and see what we get from it, and if we get some traction, then we take and we sort of expand that line of thinking. So I would encourage people. I think in this world we can get sort of really quick feedback, and we haven't gotten really heavy into the data aspects of things, but data it doesn't rule the earth like a lot of people think it does. Creativity is still super important, and there's that kind of clash between data and creative right now. My teams battle all the time over this, which is a fascinating thing to kind of follow and see where this evolves. But not everything is on sort of your Google Analytics reports. That doesn't rule the earth. It's important to understand what's going on, but it doesn't rule the earth.
How do you cross that divide? I mean, how do you make the decision when it's between data and creativity?
Well, I mean, I like to look at it as sort of sort of the creative experience and sort of data is some of it's obviously salient fact, and some of it is indicator. So the indicator piece of it is sort of what it's leading you to believe. But I think creativity is still still rules.
What makes a great brand?
Great question. I think it's I think all great brands are authentic. I think they're real. I think they're solving real problems. They're creating emotion. You think of Nikes and the Just Do It's and all that. I mean that stuff is lived on forever. But not everybody is a competitive athlete, but somebody can watch one of their great commercials and get sort of inspired to go at least buy the shoes, but maybe not run. But at least you get inspired to buy them, right? But there's an emotion sort of it evokes, and there's an experience. I mean, Apple's done a great job of, Steve Jobs has done an amazing job of creating an experience, not even just with, sort of the hardware, but even how you, sort of reveal the hardware and the packaging. I mean, everything, everything that the consumer touches is important, as part of that sort of brand experience. And brand experience, goes beyond, even just opening things. It's, how people answer phones and, the customer service aspects and all those things that make up sort of that brand ecosystem, if you will. So I think great brands are sort of authentic and true and are able to deliver on a clearly established promise.
Mm-hmm. Chad Robley is the CEO of Mindgruve. Chad, thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.